Well, thank you all for joining me on this virtual meeting this afternoon. This book came out in August, and there was a period there where I was able to give a whole bunch of in-person speeches, and I think I spoke to every Rotary Club in Wichita. I spoke to the main branch of the public library. I've gone all over town, but now we're back to being safer virtually. So I'm glad to know that I've worked out all my Zoom issues long ago. Well, except for one, but and that we can all kind of get together and talk here. I just want to tell you a little bit about my book and myself. Like Tracy said, I wrote Classic Restaurants of Wichita, and I've been a reporter at the Wichita Eagle since 1997. I came here from, I grew up in Dodge City, Kansas, and I went to the University of Kansas for journalism school. I got my first job out of college in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And then I ended up at the Eagle to write about features. They wanted me to just come write feature stories, fun stories about life and people and lifestyle and exercise and all that good stuff, entertainment. So I did that for several years. And then when it was the year 2000, the paper decided to switch the Go section, which is the Friday entertainment section of the paper, from a broadsheet, which is the full size of the paper, to a tab, which is more of the little square magazine style. And it's since switched back. If you're a paper subscriber, you know that. But in the year 2000, they switched it to that tab size. And at that time, there was really nobody writing about restaurants. Lori Lindenberger had done it, but she had stopped doing it. Diane Lewis had done it for years. Kathleen Kelly had written about restaurants long before that. And so nobody was really doing that. And restaurants are obviously something that Wichita is very excited about. So when that happened, they asked me if I would like to write about restaurants. And I always grew up a food lover. In Dodge City, we didn't have tons of restaurants to choose from. I remember back in those days, I thought that the ultimate of fine dining was when we would go to my grandpa's house in Joplin, Missouri, and he would take us to the Red Lobster. And I just thought, when I got to the Red Lobster, I thought I had made it. And the Red Lobster in Joplin was really all I ever thought about, because we didn't have anything like that in Dodge City. And so I'd always loved restaurants and eating out. And, my writing style went more to fun, featurey type things. So I decided to start doing that. And my very first restaurant review I wrote was in October of 2000. So 22 years ago. That's hard to believe. And the first restaurant I ever reviewed was a restaurant called C Bass, C.BASS. And I don't know if any of you remember it, because it was pretty short lived, but it was all the way out at 29th and Rock by Bradley Fair, but across the street where Twin Peaks is now. And it was a seafood restaurant owned by Scott Redler. And I don't know if you all recognize that name, but Scott Redler is the co-founder of Freddy's Frozen Custard, which you probably know has restaurants all over Wichita and now all over the world, all over the world. They even have one in Dubai, but definitely all over the country. And so that restaurant, I gave it a good review. I enjoyed it. It didn't last all that long, as homegrown seafood restaurants kind of don't have a great track record in Wichita, but I think we can all feel okay about Scott Redler, because he, with Freddy's, I think he's doing just fine. They sold it last year for a lot of money. And so I don't think he's sad about sea bass anymore. But that was the first restaurant I wrote about. And I've written about restaurants ever since then. I have a blog called Dining with Denise, or it's a page on the Wichita Eagles website you can find. It's also a Facebook page. And for the last 22 years, I try to write, if I can, I write two or three restaurant stories a day. And there's so much news out there, and people have such an appetite for it. And so we quickly realized, once we could tally and see what people were actually reading online, that's the stories that are the most read on the paper's website, which makes me happy. But it just it shows what an interest there is in food and dining out in our town. And so I've done that for 22 years. You can read my restaurant review or restaurant stories. I don't do reviews as much anymore, at Dining with Denise on Facebook or Dining with Denise on Kansas.com. Basically, if you search Dining with Denise, you'll find it. And that's my full-time job. But probably way before the pandemic started, I was contacted by a publisher called Arcadia Press, and they publish these little books that you can see what mine looks like. Their specialty is local history books. So they find authors in towns all over the country, and they have certain topics they like covered, and they search for authors who can write these topics. And then their books are sold all over the place. You know, you can find them if you have ever gone to Barnes and Noble. There's a whole local history section, and a whole bunch, probably the majority of the titles are from the history press, Arcadia Press. So they contacted me and said, you know, they'd seen some stories I'd written online about. I did a story several years ago that was very popular, where I tracked and researched until I figured out what were the 10 oldest still running restaurants in Wichita. And that took me a lot of time up in our archives. I got a cold from breathing all the dust and mold up there that lasted for weeks, but it was so fun for me. And I've always kind of, since I moved to Wichita, I'm super fascinated by local history. I love to see old pictures of what was here in Wichita before I was. I live in an old house. I don't know if you can see, I live in my house was built in 1908. So that, you know, my interest in history was sparked by that. We researched the old owner of my house and found the original owner of my house, found some really interesting stuff about that. So when I wrote that story, that really kind of got me going on two of my big interests, which is history, local history, and restaurants. And by the way, if we were in person, I would quiz you, but since we are not, I'm just going to tell you the answers to my little trivia questions here. What I determined from that story I wrote, this was, I think, back in 2014, the longest running restaurant in Wichita that's still open is Livingston's, which it traces its history all the way back more than 100 years. I think getting close to 120 years. Andy Livingston founded the first one. They went through the years, they've moved all over the place, but there are still members of his family that own two Livingstons in town all these years later. One is at Lincoln Heights over by Watermark, that's owned by his great-great-great-great-granddaughter, Melissa. And the other one is out at Cambridge Market at 21st and Webb, and it's owned by his grandson or great-grandson's widow, Jeannie Shaft. So there's still two Livingstons going in our town. So I decided that's the longest one that's running still, even though it wasn't in the same place that it opened. The one that's still running in the same place that it opened from day one for the longest is the NuWay on West Douglas, which opened 90 years ago in this little spot. And I live very close. I live over my friends, so I'm very close to that NuWay. It opened there 90 years ago. It's still running in the same place. If you ever go in there, they've still got the old diner counter. They have pictures of the old diner all over the place. It doesn't really look the same, but it's in the same spot where it was opened all those years ago, which I find that very fascinating. But anyway, when this publisher asked if I could write this book, of course, I was excited because these are two of the things I love the most. And so I kind of put it off for a while because that's what journalists do. We procrastinate till the last minute. But when the pandemic got underway, I decided that was a perfect time to sort of dive into it and really get it done because I couldn't go anywhere anyway. So what I did was I was trying to determine which restaurants were the ones that people miss the most, you know, that they have the best memories of. And I have written that story over the years too. For 20 years, every now and then I'll say to readers, hey, if you could bring one restaurant back from the past and go to it one more time, which one would you pick? And that topic has always been so popular, and people would write me hundreds of emails, and the answers were always the same places. So it was places like Chateaubriand, Portobello Road, the King's X, Lazy R, Camille's, the list would go on, but I would hear the same names every time. So I had a pretty basic knowledge in my head of at least the 20 or so restaurants that people miss the most. But I knew there were more. I've only lived here since 97. So I decided to poll some experts on this matter. And there are two places in town. If you need some answers on history, or if you're interested in local history, there's two places that you should always go. And if you're a Facebook subscriber, that's what you need to be to find these. But there's two Facebook groups out there that are the best. One is called, and a group on Facebook, by the way, you look up the group, you just search it on Facebook, and then you have to ask them if you can join, and they will say yes. You just have to wait for them to approve you, but it doesn't take long. They let anybody in, they let me in. One is called Wichita History from My Perspective. That's the title of the page. So you can go there. And the other one is called If You Grew Up in Wichita, Kansas, Then You Remember, ... That's the name of the other group. And those two groups are amazing if you're in them. There's daily posts every day from the members. They have thousands of members. And it's people who are interested in nostalgia. So they'll say, hey, does anybody remember, going to Ackerman Island back in the day? But I quickly realized that the majority of those posts, I would venture 80% of the posts on both of those pages are people reminiscing about restaurants that are gone. And if you scroll through it, you'll see what I mean. Every single day, people will say, does anybody remember going to Albert's? And, 250 comments later, we've all reminisced about our favorite dishes from Albert's. Somebody has a picture of Albert's. Somebody's mom worked at Albert's. Someone's grandma worked at Albert's. And it just goes on and on. So what I did was I made a post in those groups and I said, hey, if I were going to write a book on this topic, which I am, which of restaurants from the past do I absolutely have to include? And I got so many responses. And a lot of them were the ones that I knew I would get, the ones I mentioned previously. But then there were lots that people mentioned that I didn't know anything about, but I heard them so many times, I knew they were important. So I honestly got out a notebook and a pencil, and I wrote down every name that people mentioned on those pages, and I put tally marks after it. And when I got finished with that, I had a pretty good idea of what restaurants I needed to include in here, at least the basics. And as I continued to research, several more came up, that I figured I needed to do. So the very first thing I did was I went to the Wichita Eagle. We were shut down. We were working from home, and we still are working from home, but the office was still open. And for years, some of you might not know this, but before, the world was really digitized and computerized, the way the Eagle kept their archive, probably from, I would say the late 50s, early 60s, all the way through 1984. 1984 is when our digital archive started. And what they would do is they had a group of ladies that worked at the Eagle, and they would take the newspaper every day and they would cut the little individual articles up. They'd cut the pictures off, but they'd cut the individual articles out with scissors. And then this is an actual file. They had these little manila envelopes, and you can see this one says Garvey's Restaurant, Historical Wichita. We had just a million file cabinets that were filled with these alphabetized. They were alphabetized by subject or person. And so I had my list, and I went down into those archives with my headlamp, because here's another interesting piece of trivia. When we moved the Eagle from 825 East Douglas to 330 North Meade in Old Town Square, where we are now, the main prerequisite for the building we would move to, our publisher said, was that we had to find a place whose floor had enough strength and integrity to support the weight of those filing cabinets with all those clips in them. And so that's one of the reasons we ended up in Old Town Square. The files went into the basement parking garage there, and they put a cage around it with a lock that only the Eagle could access, but that's where all the residents park. So that's where they were, down there. And I put my headlamp on, I had my list, and I went and dug out all of these and brought them home, and I started doing research. Incidentally, about probably I would say a month before I finished the book and turned it in, there's also another amazing resource if you are interested in local history. or history of any kind. The website, and this is not an Eagle product, so that's not why I'm pushing it. I'm pushing it because it's so amazing. But there is a website called newspapers.com, and maybe I'll log on to it before we end and I'll show it to you. But newspapers.com is a company that is digitizing all of the country's newspapers, and they've started with the big cities. And when I started this book, they had done some of Wichita's newspapers, but it was mostly the Catholic Advance. And then they had the Eagles and the Beacons, but it was from the late 1800s to like 1920, and then it stopped. 1920s, then it stopped, and then it picked back up, somewhere in the 50s, maybe up to or somewhere in the 60s, maybe up to the 70s, and then it stopped. So it was very spotty, and there wasn't much on there, which is one of the reasons I needed these files, which I poured over for weeks and weeks. But about a month before I finished the book, newspapers.com got every Wichita Eagle and Beacon ever published in our city's history on their website. So they're all there. And any topic that you want to research from the Eagle and Beacon, from the very first one that was published in late 1800s until today, you can search that database with a name, with a subject, and it's searchable. There is a fee to join. It's $75 a month, but once all the Eagles got on there, the Eagle paid for our employee subscriptions because it's the best archive we've ever had. And then I could find all the restaurants, and I found so much more than I could with these. And it would have been incredibly helpful and saved me a lot of time if that had happened 6 months earlier. But another piece of trivia is, and this surprised me, but the Eagle got rid of these files when those things got digitized. I'm told. I haven't been out of the basement to confirm this, but I'm sure it's true because I was told it was. So these files are gone. And so I was even more happy that I went home, but I took these home because now these are my personal property. They don't want them anymore. So I have all the restaurant files and some of the club files and the Joyland file, which they're not necessary now. They're just relics because it's all online. But so I spent a lot of time going through there. The good news about them not getting everything up online in time for me to use the digital archives was not having the full picture from these clip files, which are incredibly incomplete. Some files I couldn't find. Some files would just have one article in them. None of them had the photos with them. For example, here's a cool story about Garvey's. The click, see if you guys can see this. The click heard around Wichita. The click will be heard around the city tonight. That's when Garvey's, which was a really cool restaurant owned by a lady named Anna Mae Garvey. It closed in 1970. It was down right next door to the Miller Theater. I think that was on Broadway, Lawrence. It was called Lawrence, and now it's called Broadway. But you can see when the ladies would file it, they would stamp the date on it right there. You can see their stamp on there. And there's a lady's handwriting saying Garvey's, and then they would fold it up in a million little pieces and put it in the Garvey's folder. But because these clips were so incomplete, it forced me to get out there and try to find some of the people who knew about these places. And that would include, in some cases, the owners of the restaurants are still alive and still around. In a lot of cases, their children are still around. In a lot of cases, employees who worked for them are still around. And so it sent me off looking for these people so that I could fill in the blanks. And by talking to them and finding them, I got so much more information than I could have had I just relied on digital or paper research. So there were a lot of really interesting people I found that I will always remember talking to. One of my favorites was this man in town. There was a cafeteria, and the picture of this cafeteria is on the back of my book right here. You can kind of see that photo. This place was called Wolf's Cafeteria, and it was downtown on Main Street. And to orient you, on Main Street, there's a building called Century Plaza. It's right at the corner of Douglas and Main. And then behind that is a metered parking lot. And it has parking spaces for the library, the old public library, which is directly to this parking lot's south. and for Century 2, which is to this parking lot's west. And so that parking lot with meters is where Wolf's Cafeteria once stood. And it was a place that everybody went to in town. Everybody loved it. There were lines out the door. It's opened in the late teens or early 20s. There were lines out the door for years until the restaurant closed. The owner died, and the owner's son was ready to get out of the business, and the grandson didn't want to take it over. But I found the grandson. He's still alive. He's 88, 89 years old. He lives on the east side. His name is Steve Wolf, and he invited me over to his house, and he had all these family photo albums that had hundreds of pictures of wolves, including this one that only belongs to the family, that weren't out there. And he told me all about his dad and his grandpa, and just added so much to my storytelling about wolves, because I got to speak to somebody who had firsthand knowledge. I found the daughter of the man who owned Albert's during the later half of its life. Her name's Glenda, and she actually works at the Spice Merchant. And her husband, her father, is Cornell Marr. And Albert's was was a Chinese restaurant on East Kellogg that was around from the 50s until it closed in 2001, I believe. And it was opened by a man named Albert, but then Albert decided he wanted to move to California and open a restaurant there. So he sold Albert's to his nephew, Cornell Marr. And Cornell ran it from, I think, the 60s until it closed. Well, Cornell is still alive and in Wichita. And she got me on the phone with him, and he told me what he remembered. She had all these photos, all these menus to share with me. And I heard all the stories, and I actually had a book signing at the Spice Merchant right before Christmas, and I got to meet Cornell in person. And I honestly feel like I'm so excited about these people. When I meet someone who had something to do with one of these restaurants, to me, it's like meeting a celebrity. These are the celebrities for me. I call them restaurant royalty. So meeting Cornell, I had my picture taken with him. I wanted him to sign, my back. I didn't ask him to, but I just love meeting these old restaurant owners. So I've met Cornell. I met a lady at one of my book signings named Rose Coolmar, and she and her husband, Coolman, she and her husband Delmar opened. They were the original owners of Scotch and Sirloin. They didn't own it for very long. They sold it, but then they opened Mr. Dunderbox, which was a cool German restaurant / pastry type place at County Square on the upper level that people loved. All these fabulous smells would go out into the hallway of the mall. And she's still alive and hanging around Wichita too. And she came to my book signing at Doodah Diner, and I was so excited to meet her. In another book speech I gave at one of the Rotaries, I met the man who started the Swiss Colony Inn, which there were two Swiss Colony Inns in Wichita in the 70s. One was over in Twin Lakes, and it started as a cheese store, but then it also served fondue and things like that. Then he opened a second one in the Kiva level of the Garvey Center, which is kind of the basement. And it was kind of a really cool place to see and be seen in the 70s. And that man was at one of my speeches. So that's been another one I met, which was very exciting. The very first speech I gave at this book about my book when it came out in August was at the assisted living facility out on the west side. And when my speech was finished and it was question time, a man raised his hand in the back row and said, did you include Chateaubriand in your book? And I said, well, yes, of course, Chateaubriand, that's one of the main places. And he goes, oh, well, I used to own Chateaubriand. And he told me his name was Anthony Miller, and which amazed me because I wrote about Anthony Miller. I didn't know he was still around. Anthony Miller bought Chateaubriand from its founders and ran it until it closed. And so there he is. Right there in my book speech. And so that was incredibly exciting too. So one of the best things about this book has been being able to meet all of these pioneers of our restaurant scene in Wichita. And to just, they've all been so excited to talk about it because they want people to remember their contributions. they're flattered that people remember. Their kids want their contributions recorded someplace, and they were super happy that I was planning to record that in a book that could be saved. So that has been the most rewarding part. When I I need to drink a tea. Hold on one second. When I decided how to organize the book, I decided to start at the very beginning of Wichita, which was in 1870. And I started by talking about some of the earliest restaurateurs in our town, which a lot of them were kind of like saloon owners. We have Fritz Schnitzler, who owned a tavern on Douglas, back when it was still a dirt road, where you could go and get some meat and potatoes. He was one of the very earliest restaurateurs that we had, a big jolly guy. And I don't know if any of you have seen that new book by the Sedgwick County Historical Museum that they just published at Christmas time. I've got it on my coffee table. It's really big and a hardback, and it weighs 7 pounds, but they have a picture of the man, Fritz Schnitzler, standing in his saloon in the late 1800s. It just about made my head explode. And even though the book cost $100, I bought it like that so I could have my Fritz Schnitzler photo. And then I talk about the Harvey House. So, some of you might remember the movie about the Harvey girls that was based on a series of restaurants along a train route that was opened in the late teens. And we actually had one in Union Station, Harvey House lunch counter. We'll talk about that. And then I start talking about how when the restaurant scene started to multiply more, most of it was all right downtown on Douglas, off of like Broadway, Market, Main. And it was all kinds of, there were lunch counters, run by housewives. There were chili parlors, where you could go stand up and get some chili and a hot dog. There was tons of cafeterias back in the day. And then I traced that all the way up through, the 30s and 40s and 50s, when we started getting the kind of drive-ins that a lot of you probably went to when you were teenagers, like the Big Bun and the King's X and the Cow Corner and the Continental Inn and places, Continental Grill and the places like that you all remember going to. And I went all the way up through all the crazy nightclubs in the 70s. Oh my gosh. I wish I had lived here in the 70s. There were some crazy private supper clubs around this town. And I stopped in 1988 because I decided, much later than that, and we all still kind of remember it. And so I stopped in 88 and with the Pasta Mill, which was in the corner of Douglas and Rock Island, where Emerson Biggins is now, in that same building. And it was opened by a guy named Gary Streepy. It was an Italian restaurant that served fresh made pasta made on site. And it was back before Old Town was Old Town. And so at that time, there were a lot of restaurants, several restaurants in Old Town, but they were all kind of lunch places. People would go down there and do a little shopping and looking around and have lunch, but nobody went to Old Town at night in the 80s. And when Gary Streepy opened the Pasta Mill, people suddenly realized that, I think we could get people to come to Old Town in the evening. And it started the transition into what Old Town is today, which is kind of the nightclub scene and the evening scene in Wichita. So that's the one I stopped with. I also have a chapter in the back that I titled "Still Serving After All These Years." And that I had to include, most of the book is places that are gone that we forgot, that we remember, people remember and miss. But you can't have a book about classic Wichita restaurants without including some of those places that somehow amazingly have managed to last all these years and are still running. NuWay, that I mentioned to you, is one of them. The Old Mill Tasty Shop, which has been around forever. I had to get that one in there, and that one even made the cover. There's Irma and Emmett, I think was his name. Irma. Yeah. Anyway, they're in there. That's them. They're the ones who started it. Bomber Burger, Dog and Shake, Town and Country. Well, it was open when the book came out. It's not now. Spears, Angelo's, Ty's Diner, Felipe's, Connie's, all these places that have lasted for 50, 60, 70 years and are savoots. They're still going somehow, which, it's hard for a restaurant to make it 1 year, much less 100 or 50 or 60. So those are some pretty impressive feats. So I included those two. It's been super fun going around and selling this book and reminiscing with people. I just found out last week that the publisher is going to let me write a volume 2. And the reason I wanted to do that is because they gave me a word limit this time. And when I got to the word limit, I needed double the word limit for all of the restaurants that I wanted to include, and they couldn't go for that. So I had to be kind of selective. So there's a lot, I think I got all the biggies in this one, but there is a whole bunch of more that people have asked me about that I would love to learn more about and include. So I'm going to do a volume 2, and I'm still thinking about it, but I want to get the ones I missed. I want to focus more on a lot of the lunch counters like Woolworths and Dockham, and the lunch counter at the Crest, and some of the places like that. I've got some ideas, but I'm going to work on a volume 2 in the next year or so. So I hope to do that too. This book is for sale. You can get it from me. I have people come by my home office in Delano every day to buy books. I just had a guy come yesterday, and I can take any form of payment. Mine are $21.99. My friend Joe Stump is the one who got me interested in this publisher, because he had written a book called Wicked Wichita several years ago that traced the history of all the bad guys in our town. And he'd worked with them and had a good experience. So he was like, yeah, you should work with them. But now Joe has just come out with another book, and he had a book signing today at Watermark, but he'll have more. His is called Iconic Eats of Wichita, and it's different. And it's a cookbook. He's got Joe has written about cooks in town since he got here. He got here shortly after I did. And his job was being the food writer for the Eagle, meaning not writing about restaurants, writing about cooking and recipes and home cook. So Joe was able to kind of scrape up all of his favorite recipes that he's collected over the years, from restaurants, from home cooks, from church cooks, from his, friends, his foodie friends he hangs out with. And he collected a lot of his best recipes that were published in the Eagle. He left the Eagle 15 years ago or so. He's now the editor for Active Age. He's written for Splurge. He's a caterer. He's a cooking class instructor. So he's collected some of the best recipes in town. And so he put those in this book, which is also now on sale at Watermark, and from Joe. And I can hook you up with Joe too. But it's just been really fun to do this. I wanted to show you all some pictures that might get you going. These are some pictures that I collected while I was doing the book. And the way I found there's me. I'm going to pause it for a minute. The way I found my pictures was, first of all, I got a lot of pictures from the descendants themselves or the owners. Those were my favorite. I finally persuaded the Eagle that they should let me use their pictures from their archives of restaurants. Doesn't hurt when your best friend's a photo editor, but it took a little convincing. And then I also persuaded the Sedgwick County Historical Museum to let me use a few of theirs. And they let me, that was very generous for them, especially because they're about to publish their own book that has some of these photos in it too. But they've got some fabulous recipe or restaurant photos in their archives, which I had to have. But this is so fun. The pictures are the best part. And I have like 100 restaurants in there. I have almost 100 photos too. Then I'm going to show you some of them because that's the fun part. And see if you remember them. Let's stop looking at me. But the reason I paused on me is because where I chose to have my author photo taken, this is 412 West Douglas or East Douglas? East Douglas. It's where Gallery 12 is. It's the old Mead building. And this is where Rich and Marnie Vliet, that's another person I met while I was doing this book, was Marnie. And she still lives around town. She and her late husband, Rich, opened the Looking Glass, which was a really cool fern bar in the 70s, right down here on Douglas. And people loved going there. It was like a place where singles hung out, and all the Eagle guys went there after work and had beers or had wine. But this is where this was. And I always go by that building and try to imagine the Looking Glass there. It's where the Roxy's Theater is on the upstairs, or where Cabaret Old Town used to be. But I wanted to have my picture taken in front of one of these buildings. So that's why I had my picture taken there. Let's see what else we've got here. This is Chuck Schonifer right here and his wife. And Chuck Schonifer opened a place called Cow Cow Corner. which was kind of a little drive-in. I believe it was over on Central, if I'm correct. I would have to double check where it was exactly. But when Chuck later met up with a guy named Colonel Sanders and learned about this new fried chicken recipe, and he and his partner Hugh Stevens started selling this new invention called Kentucky Fried Chicken out of their restaurant. It became so popular that they eventually switched their restaurant over to Cow Cow Chicken, and they became the first Kentucky Fried Chicken franchisees in our town from this little kind of Hawaiian themed drive-in to Kentucky Fried Chicken franchisees. And I think I just read yesterday that his family just sold his interest in the eats, but that was a cool one to learn about. I've met up with his daughters too. This is an early look inside of a King's X restaurant, which you all might know that White Castle was founded here. And when it moved to Ohio, they sold their diners to an employee named AJ Jimmy King, and he switched the White Castles into King's X restaurants, and he owned those forever. There's the remnants of it was sold to the Davidsons, Jack and Linda Davidson, and they still own King's X. And all that's left now, though, is the Jimmy's Diner on Rock Road and the Jimmy's Diner over where the old Talks Coffee House is on Harry. But that's an early look into a King's X restaurant. There's a Big Bun. That was also a King's X restaurant. That was right over there at the corner of Central and Oliver, where the cute Quick Trip is now. But people, teens, I think, love to go here. And I think it was like a giant loose meat sandwich, is my understanding. Not a burger, but like a giant NuWay. And the lady who's sitting right here in the car called me a few months ago, and she's like, "I'm in the car. Where do I find this picture?" Let's see what else we got here. There's another picture of a King's X. Here, this is Brown's Cafeteria, which was right across the street from Wesley. It was owned by a man who started it as a burger stand, and then he ended up having several Brown's Cafeterias around town. And his son, Charlie Brown, went on to own a place called Charlie Brown's. So this was an early, and I just love the booths and the wood floors and those retro chairs. I love this picture. But they had several. This is Elizabeth's, which was a restaurant at Kellogg and Bluff, which it was kind of like garden themed. You see, she had a lot of plant life in there. It was kind of a ladies who lunch place, like the Innis Tea Room. You went there with your mom and you wore white gloves and ate. And this, when she sold this building, it became Portobello Road, which then when Kellogg was expanded, this building had to go. So this was a pretty iconic building, but it's no longer there. We also have, this is the Brown's Cafeteria on the west side. They had several. This is the Hickory House. A lot of people remember going to the Hickory House. They had like colonial themed decorations. I think it was on Central, but people love to ask me about the Hickory House, and I would have loved to have gone to it. This is a postcard I found that right here. You can see the sign says Holly Cafe, and Holly Cafe was one of our early, they call them chop suey restaurants. This one's right on, I think that's Douglas. Is that Douglas or Market? It might be Market. It gets a little fuzzy, but anyway, that's a picture of it. Or a postcard. This is an early shot of Albert's in the early day. I love this palm tree. There's Albert. That's the man who founded it, but then he sold it to Cornell. Here's Albert's right before it closed on Kellogg, if you remember the sign. You can see the sign for T95 back there, but it closed in the early 2000s, and that's one of the later pictures that was taken of Albert's sign. Sidman's was a chain of restaurants that people loved, kind of dinery. This is the Lazy R, or one of the Lazy R's. There were several. And people love the Lazy R. They had all kinds of chuck wagony type, burger type delicacies, and they were kind of known by these arches here. People still remember the Lazy R. I get asked about that all the time. This actually is a chain of burger shops. It was owned by my neighbor's uncle. This guy was owned a place called Bill's Le Gourmet, and it was over on Oliver, where the first Angelo's opened up, and he would go from table to table and make flaming steak Diane. It was a jazz club, and he would have jazz artists, and there were some semi-famous jazz albums recorded during the jam sessions at his restaurant. But people remember that place too. Oh, Steak and Ale. Everybody loved Steak and Ale. And that's one of the chain restaurants I insisted on including along with Chi-Chi's because and Grandy's, because there are a few chains that really made an impression on people, and those are among them. This was a place called Casey Jones Junction, and its photo, a picture of its exterior is also on the cover of the book, but it had a train on the counter, and kids who are good, grandma would take you there after your doctor's appointment, and your burger came to your table on the choo-choo train. Look at that little girl about to grab her burger. I would have loved to have gone there. That's the exterior of it. It's now Harry's on East Douglas. And there was one on West Kellogg too, and it's now Lee's Chinese. But that's what was in it originally. Oh, there's a menu from Casey Jones Junction. I found the nephew of the owner. This is a painting of a place called Le Beaujolais that was in Clifton Square. It was there just for a brief period, but it was a real gourmet kind of place, one of the early fancy restaurants we had. There's the original NuWay. That's pretty exciting to see. This is a Bill Gaufrier painting of Ty's Diner, which was one of our long running ones. Of course, I have stuff on Pizza Hut, which was founded here. I got the story of that in there. I got the story of the founding of White Castle in there too. Oh, here's the building that has the looking glass, had the looking glass before they changed it. This was what it was when they bought the building. And that's where I was standing in that photo. It's probably right about here. And that's one Marnie gave me from the early days, which I love. There's the pasta mill. There you might recognize that's where Emerson Biggins is. There's a look inside the looking glass. That's what it looked like inside. If you were going to enjoy crepes or drinks or something there in that 70s looking, there's the entrance. Something straight out of Three's Company. I love it. Oh, that's another look inside the pasta mill, which was the place. Here's Dr. Redbird's. This was also owned by Rich and Marnie Vliet. It was a sandwich place, and they named all their sandwiches after kind of an apothecary, a pharmacy type theme. And people love Dr. Redbird's. I hear about it all the time. That's an early menu that Marnie provided for me. This is a place called Cafe Chantilly that was one of the early Antoine Toubia restaurants. It was over in an old Kip's Big Boy place. I think over on Kellogg, maybe near Armour. I'm having a hard time remembering the exact address, but I'm sure many of you went there. Abe's was one of our little throwback supper clubs. This one was really dimly lit, and over on 29th Street, it had these glowing Polynesian themes. This is one of the few that I actually got to go to before it was closed, and I thought it was pretty cool. There's Abe and his wife when they first opened the place. Oh, this is an ad I found about a early restaurateur that I included. There's an ad for a place called Ikebon that people remember on South Seneca. There's Schonifer and Stevens with Colonel Sanders back when they first met him. Oh, and here's Fritz Schnitzler's. That was Fritz Schnitzler's place on Douglas back in the day, the early restaurateur I told you about. And here's Felipe, the man Felipe, back before he died, working in his kitchen. And so there's Fritz Schnitzler again, but that's just kind of a collection of some of the photos. Like, oh, this is Mrs. Garvey from Garvey's, the place that was right next to the Miller Theater. And she did home cooking dishes. You can see she did. And people loved her, and she had very exacting standards. Oh, this place was called the Lancers Club. I actually got to go in this building. It still looks, the chairs and tables are gone, but the stage is still there. This was a members only nightclub in the basement of the Century Plaza, kind of right outside Century 2 where those fountains are. And this was a place, they had all kinds of B-level performers like Frank Sinatra Jr., but they had live music all the time. There was carpet on the walls. This was the place to be in the 70s. I would have loved to have seen that. This is an ad I found this was in the early teens, one of these cafeterias in Wichita. And this guy bragged in the paper about how great his women cooks were. He was crazy. TJ Rice. Oh, there's El Charro. That's over there where Scotch and Sirloin is back here. And this is that building that's in front of Scotch and Sirloin still. It's not a restaurant anymore, but this was an early restaurant, a Mexican restaurant that had an organ inside that rotated. There was a stand with an organ on it. The organ player rotated. We need that back at that. Look at that. We need that back in restaurants. That's inside of El Charro. There's the organ, I think. And then here's a little fountain. Oh, I want to go there. I would love to travel back in time and see these places. Longneckers was a place people liked. It was a build your own burger thing that was here for a while. There's Cafe Chantilly's sign when it was closing. There you go. Those are my pictures. So I love going through some of those, and I have so many more in there that I love. But I would love to, if anybody has any questions, I know we're kind of running out of time because I talk so much, but does anybody have a question they want to share?
Denise,
Yeah.
thing that one of the people indicated is that they would appreciate it if you shared those Facebook pages again that you mentioned at the very beginning.
Yeah, sure. Let me see if I can share my screen again. I can even show you guys. Let's see here. Let me get on to Google. One is called, well, hold on a second. One is called Wichita History from My Perspective. Let me see here. Can you guys see that screen right now? Probably not. Are you seeing a screen at all?
We're not
Okay,
you.
let me put it over here. Okay, let me put it over here. Am I sharing my screen anymore? Well, maybe that's too hard to show you. One's called Wichita History from My Perspective, and the other one is called If You Grew Up in Wichita, Kansas, Then You Remember, ... But you just you find the group on Facebook, and then you just say join group, and they might ask you a couple of questions, and then they'll let you in, but they're very fun.
Thank you. And then someone asked if you included Doc's Steakhouse.
Oh yes, I have all those old steakhouses. They all they're grouped together in my brain. Doc's, Abe's, Savoots. But yeah, I have Doc's in there. The Doc's building is still there. It's closed in 2014. There's nothing in it. But if you drive by, the sign on this building still says garlic salad. It's not come off after all those years. So I do have Doc's for sure. That's on North Broadway.
Another question was, will Patty Ryans make the next book and/or The Grape?
Okay, I have this little book I've started, my notebook, an old notebook my grandpa gave me, where I'm writing down the ones that I don't have. Patty Ryans. Patty Ryans or Patty O'Brien's? Patty Ryans. I'll look it up. I've not heard of that one. I do have The Grape in this first one, and that was a pretty cool place too, over on Rock Road, a wine bar back before wine bars were a thing. O'Brien's. Okay, I'll look that up. O'Brien's. But yeah, The Grape is in there. And one thing I found out about The Grape when I was researching it was that it was the first place in Wichita that had outdoor dining, which I think is kind of cool. Patty O'Brien's. I have heard of that one. I'll put that on the list to look up. I have heard of that one. Is that kind of where, I wonder if that's where O'Brien's, it's kind of, there's that O'Brien's on Kellogg over there by the Scotch. I wonder if that's related to that, but I've got that on my list now in my grandpa notebook. I'm ready.
Okay, so another question was, the site that you mentioned for capturing all the newspapers issues, what is its name?
That website is called newspapers.com. And I think it costs about $75 a year to be a member, which seems high, but if you like history, it's worth every cent. You can look up anything. Like I found so many stories just about the people that owned my house, or, sometimes I want to know about a house down the street from me. And I'm like, when was that open? You just type it right up, but newspapers.com. It's very simple.
And Linda, you had asked if that is available through through the library. To my knowledge, no. We have a lot of newspaper resources that are available with your Wichita Public Library card, but I do not believe that one is.
There is a way, Tracy, that you can get a free subscription through the Kansas Historical Society, I believe. I'm not sure if it's a full subscription or partial, but you have to Google it, but there is a way to get it through the Kansas Historical Society. So you just have to Google that and figure out how that works.
Okay.
But I didn't, for my purposes, it wasn't a strong enough membership. So I went ahead and paid, but I think you can access some stuff for free if you get the sign up through them.
Okay. Thank you for that information. Mm-hmm. That's super.
Yeah.
Another one asked, how about the cafeteria called the Forum?
Yes, I do have the Forum in there. That one was very exciting for me to learn about. That was downtown, and there's a picture of that one in there too. And the Forum was a cafeteria that actually started in Kansas City. And one thing that was super exciting for me is I went to an antique store with my sister over the summer, and I found a plate from the Forum cafeteria, that was floating around the antique store. Now, this one would have been from Kansas City's, not ours, but I was so excited and I bought it and own it. Now it's in a place of prominence in my home, but that was super exciting to find that. But yes, I have the Forum in there. Yes.
What
And
about,
the Fairland Cafe. I have that one too.
okay, what about Kip's Big Boy?
I don't have Kip's Big Boy itself. It's in the book because that's the building that Antoine Tubia bought to open Cafe Chantilly. But it sounds to me like Kip's Big Boy might be one I should research. So I'm going to write that down here too. Kip's Big Boy. I think wasn't there a statue of a guy out there kind of holding up a burger or a plate of pancakes or something? I got him written down.
Okay. Did you ever run across a small cafe on Harry, the south part of town, where they collected salt and pepper shakers?
No, what's that? I want to know about that. Wonder what it was called. If anybody thinks of the name of that, I'll look that up at newspapers.com as soon as we hang up. Why don't we have that anymore? I want that now. I'll look that up, but I had not heard of that one.
Okay. There was another one, the Famous.
The Famous. I've heard of the Famous. I did not get that in there. That's one I need to get in there. I also need to get in there, like the Stockyards is one I didn't get that people talk about. A place called a burger place called Dead Cow. Got to get that in there. And then there's like the Twin Lakes Club. That's one I did not get. I'm writing these down so I'll remember. But no, I don't have the Famous, but I did hear of it. Oh, and somebody thought I should put in Doodah Deli, which replaced the Forum when it closed. I'm making myself the Pizza Planet, the Cedars. I do have the Cedars. That's in there. The Pizza Planet, I don't, but I do have Shakey's Pizza. Let me write down Pizza Planet. Okay.
What about Anthony's on North Broadway?
Anthony's. I don't recall learning about that one. Anthony's on North Broadway. I'll write that one down. Check into it. Thank you.
Okay, so here's a statement and then a question.
Okay.
I'm a lifelong resident born in mid-1980s. Growing up, I would occasionally hear people say that Wichita has one of the highest number of restaurants per capita. Do you know if that was true?
I've heard that throughout my life too. Most of the restaurant people I speak to around town do not think that that's true. We are a town that loves restaurants though, and eating out is one of our main forms of entertainment. We don't have the beach or the ocean or anything else to keep us company. But I do know Wichita is often used as a test market. I don't know if we were excited about this, but fast food chains want to try out a new burger. They'll try it here and decide if it works in Wichita, it'll work elsewhere. But I don't think that per capita situation is true, according to people I've talked to. But that doesn't mean we aren't an incredibly enthusiastic restaurant people here.
Okay. And then a couple more mentions of specific places. Riverside Cup of Tea.
I remember that one. I actually went there. I'll jot that down. That might be a little bit new, more modern for me, but I will look at the dates. I went there before it closed.
Okay. And then I may mispronounce this, so I apologize. Chez Joy.
Chez Joy. Is
And
it C-H-E-Z?
It's C-H-E-Z. And then also Pizza Via.
Pizza Via. I've heard of that one. In fact, I do believe that the man who owned that came to my first book signing and wondered why he wasn't in there. So thanks for reminding me. Look at this. I've already got my second book written. Pizza Via.
Do you know the name of the cafeteria that was on South Seneca, south of 31st Street?
Would that have been Sidman's? I think there was a Sidman's on South Seneca, but I can't be 100% sure, but that would be my guess. I do have Sidman's in there. They had tons. They had like Sidman's South Sea, Sidman's Western Grill, Sidman's this, Sidman's that. It was a really big deal back in the 50s. And so.
Okay. And I think that's pretty much what has been mentioned in the chat that you didn't necessarily mention in your presentation. Oh, another one was the Heidelberg.
The Heidelberg. I just saw that and I have had people ask me about that one. So thanks for bringing that one up. I'm going to add it to my list. That must have been a pretty cool German place. See how many there are? I could think I could write volumes 3, 4, and 5 too. Sidman's, but it was close to, I didn't see all of that, but I'm not sure what other cafeteria that might have been. Cafeterias were quite the deal for a long time, and then they weren't.
Are there any other questions?
Well, if anybody who needs a book, you can email me at dneil, DNEIL, at wichitaeagle.com, or you can send me a message through social media and I can get a book to you. I can get you a signed book. And if you don't want to mess with me and you don't care about having a signed book, they're at Watermark and Barnes and Noble too. But the people that I've talked to say that they've had so much fun. It's like a good thing to have around your family, especially if you're, 55 and above, and you can just sit there and reminisce for hours about things. So I've heard that from people. So it's a fun thing to have in your shelf. And Joe's book is a good one too, if you want to cook some good classic Wichita restaurants. Fargo's and Wyatt's, got it. Saw that one pop up.
Okay. Well, Denise, I want to thank you so much for doing this presentation for us today. It was incredibly informative, and I really appreciate your passion. And I know that a lot of the participants have the same passion that you do.
Yes.